So what is the blood-brain barrier? Well, the blood-brain barrier is exactly what it sounds like. It's a barrier between the blood and the brain. And actually, it's interesting because the brain and spinal cord, which comprise the central nervous system, or the CNS, right, are separated from the peripheral nervous system, or the PNS, by the meninges, right, which is a series of layers that wrap around the exterior, the outer portion of the cerebrum, right, the cerebellum and the spinal cord, right, and separate the CNS from the PNS. Remember, the meninges consist of the dura mater, the tough outer dura mater. Remember, the dura actually, comes down in here between the two hemispheres and forms the falx cerebri, which is the cerebral, like sickle, right? It's a sickle-shaped, piece of tough mother. It also has a tent over, the cerebellum here. This is called the tentorium, the portion that sticks in here, right, and separates the cerebellum, from the cerebrum. Below the dura mater, right, the tough mother, is the arachnoid, which is the thin sort of filamentous, cabling, that links the dura, to all the vasculature that hangs around, the brain and the spinal cord, actually, and then links also to the layer that lies directly on top of the brain and spinal cord, the soft mother, right, which is called the pia mater, which is a very thin layer that overlies, the cortex, for example, of the brain. But the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord, right, are also separated from the peripheral nervous system by the blood-brain barrier. And the blood-brain barrier it is not like an overall wrapping the same way the meninges are, right? The blood-brain barrier is kind of the actual vasculature itself. All of the different, arteries and veins and arterioles and venules, all the different sorts of, all the plumbing actually that works its way, deep inside the brain and the spinal cord. It turns out that in most of the body, right, in the periphery of the body, our plumbing, our vasculature, our blood vessels are leaky. The cells that actually form the tubes, particularly the tubes of the capillaries. So, you've got this great big heart right here, right? And then you've got, a giant vessel that comes off of it, right? That's called the aorta. And, then it splits into these arteries, right? Which then split further into smaller branches called arterioles. And then you get into the smallest, of, branches, web-like branches, right? Which are called the capillaries. And the capillaries are very thin and very small, and they reach like all different parts of the brain, but also all different parts of the body. And the capillaries in the periphery, in the body, like in your other organs and your skin and all this, the cells that form the capillary walls, that form the actual tubes of the capillaries, right, of the vasculature, actually adhere kind of loosely to each other. So they're not tightly adhered, they're kind of leaky. So you have leaky plumbing in your body, and that lets substances that are traveling in the blood kind of leak out into the surrounding tissues, and it also lets substances that are generated in the body, for example, also leak in to ultimately work their way and get excreted in various ways. So leaky plumbing in the peripheral periphery of the body, but in the central nervous system, we now know that there are glial cells, right? They're called astrocytes, that release factors that contribute to the tightening up of the plumbing. It plugs the leaks. The cells that form the capillary walls adhere tightly to each other. And what this does is it makes access to the brain and spinal cord much more selective. Substances in the blood, if they're going to get into the central nervous system, they typically have to, take advantage of some kind of a channel or some kind of a transporter, some kind of a specific transport mechanism. So the brain can be much more selective, and spinal cord too, in terms of what it allows inside. And that can be very protective, right? If you think about, potential access, for viruses or, drugs, there's certain drugs that will not cross the blood-brain barrier, etc. So the brain and spinal cord, the central nervous system, is protected, not only by the meninges, which surround it, and then they're filled with fluid below the dura, right, in the subdural space. But also the blood-brain barrier, which works to separate, substances in the blood, from the brain.